Across the United States right now, a quiet shift has taken place. Police patrols are a little more frequent. Surveillance teams are paying closer attention. Federal agencies are tracking conversations and signals the public will never see. The reason is straightforward. Officials believe some form of retaliation is possible, not missiles lighting up the sky or fighter jets over U.S. cities, but something far less predictable and much harder to stop once set in motion. Size. After recent strikes against Iran and the reported killing of its supreme leader, threats have intensified, warnings have sharpened, and major U.S. cities have moved into a heightened alert posture. The question isn't whether tensions are high, they clearly are. Curious. The question is what that actually means for you, your city, and everyday life across the country. Are we looking at cyber disruptions, lone actors, coordinated operations, or simply a cautious response that sounds scarier than the underlying reality? In the next few minutes, we're going to unpack what officials are actually saying, what experts think is realistic, which cities are ramping up security, and, most importantly, what Americans need to understand right now, without panic, without exaggeration, and without political noise. Hi, I'm Artur. If you're new here, I break down fast-moving national security stories in a way that's steady, clear, and grounded in confirmed information, not just what's trending on social media. There's a lot of emotion attached to this situation, and that's understandable. Words like retaliation and high alert instantly trigger fear, especially when they're linked to major U.S. cities. But the key here is separating what could happen from what is likely to happen. Possibility versus probability. In this video, we'll go step by step through what triggered this spike in tension, why experts say a direct missile strike is not the real concern, what types of threats federal agencies are actually preparing for, and what sensible awareness, not panic, should look like right now. Once you understand the kind of threat officials are focused on, the whole picture starts to look very different. To understand why cities are on heightened alert, you have to start with the trigger. The United States, working alongside Israel, conducted strikes against targets in Iran. Reports indicate that Iran's supreme leader, a figure who had dominated the country's political landscape for decades, was killed. For Iran, that's not just a battlefield loss, it's political, symbolic, and deeply personal for many people inside the country. When someone who has shaped a nation's identity for 40 years is suddenly gone, the reaction is rarely quiet. Almost immediately, Iranian officials signaled that there would be retaliation. President Trump publicly warned Iran not to respond, making it clear that any counterattack would draw a forceful U.S. reaction. You now have a volatile mix, a major strike, confirmed casualties, public warnings on both sides, and global attention fixed on what happens next. That combination naturally heightens concern inside intelligence and security circles. But here's where the situation is more nuanced than the average headline. When most people hear retaliation, they imagine traditional warfare, missiles launched across continents, dramatic military exchanges, large-scale battles. That is not what most experts consider likely in this case. Multiple defense analysts have said openly that a missile launched directly from Iran at the U.S. mainland is extremely unlikely. The geography is challenging on its own, and more importantly, the U.S. has layered missile defense systems built specifically to counter long-range threats. Early warning satellites, naval defenses, and ground-based interceptors all stand between a launch and any U.S. city. A direct ballistic strike is not the scenario dominating security briefings right now. That's important, because fear tends to fill in gaps with cinematic worst-case images. National security planning, however, is built on probability, not movie plots. And the odds of a missile flying from Iran into a U.S. city undetected are extraordinarily low. That's not what is keeping officials awake at night. Instead, their focus is on threats that are far less visible and far more difficult to predict. Modern retaliation doesn't always look like tanks and rockets. It often looks asymmetric, indirect, scattered, and sometimes carried out by individuals instead of regular armies. That shift from conventional warfare to asymmetric threat is what most people don't immediately see, and it's why the internal conversations inside federal agencies sound very different from the speculation you might see online. If there is a battlefield to worry about, it's unlikely to be in the skies. It's likely to be much more subtle. That's exactly why officials are emphasizing local vigilance rather than warning about incoming missiles. So if the concern isn't a missile attack, what is it? Based on public statements and briefings from the FBI, the Pentagon, and other agencies, the primary worry is asymmetric retaliation, specifically the possibility of a lone wolf or sleeper cell-style attack inside the United States. Those phrases get thrown around a lot, so it's important to be clear about what they mean. A lone wolf attack generally involves an individual acting on their own, without direct operational control from a foreign government, but motivated or inspired by broader ideological or geopolitical events. A sleeper cell refers to a small group of individuals who have been living quietly under the radar and then activate when tensions escalate. Both types of threats are hard to spot because they don't require armies moving, large money transfers, or obvious logistics trails. That's what makes them so challenging. They don't need advanced missile systems, airspace violations, or any formal declaration of war. They could involve a homemade explosive, a vehicle used as a weapon, or a single armed person targeting a crowded space. Right now, none of these scenarios are confirmed. There are no public reports of a specific plan or a scheduled attack. Agencies are preparing for possibilities, not certainties. Historically, when geopolitical tensions spike, the risk of isolated retaliatory acts goes up. That's the pattern officials are working from. This is where uncertainty becomes powerful. Some analysts argue that, if something did occur, it could happen quickly, within days, especially if an individual is already radicalized and doesn't need coordination. Others note that even a relatively small operation often requires planning, communication, and logistics, pushing any realistic timeline into weeks. Intelligence agencies rarely tie risk to precise dates, and that ambiguity alone can heighten public anxiety. When officials say, "Stay vigilant," they are not saying, "An attack is coming tomorrow morning." They're saying the risk level has moved enough to justify more awareness and tighter security. Timing matters for another reason. Sophisticated attacks, even small ones, tend to aim for maximum psychological impact. Crowded venues, symbolic locations, or peak activity times. But again, it's critical to distinguish between an elevated alert level and a confirmed threat. Right now, cities are in prevention mode, not response mode. Prevention mode means more patrols, more monitoring, and more intelligence sharing. It does not mean an attack is scheduled or inevitable. In reality, most periods of heightened alert end quietly, with nothing happening, not because the warnings were exaggerated, but because extra vigilance worked as a deterrent. That is rarely mentioned in dramatic coverage, but it's often the outcome. The city's now increasing security presence are not chosen at random. There's a logic to who gets prioritized, and understanding that helps make sense of what you're seeing. According to federal guidance and local briefings, the focus is on major metropolitan hubs: New York, Los Angeles, San Francisco, Dallas, Seattle, Washington, D.C., Chicago, Miami, and similar cities. These places concentrate large populations, financial systems, transportation networks, political institutions, and globally recognizable landmarks. When security agencies decide where to concentrate limited resources, they start where the potential impact of any incident would be largest. That's about strategic value, not secret intelligence that something is about to happen in a particular spot. On the ground, high alert usually translates into more officers in busy areas, a stronger, more visible police presence around train stations, airports, bridges, tunnels, and public venues, and closer coordination between local intelligence units and federal agencies. Some departments may adjust schedules or assignments to improve response times. The key point is that this posture is precautionary. It's a way to close gaps and signal readiness. Law enforcement regularly increases visibility during international crises, both to deter would-be attackers and to reassure the public. When people hear their city is on high alert, the imagination often jumps ahead of the facts. High alert is about being ready and making sure vulnerabilities are harder to exploit, not about an impending scheduled attack. In the past, greater visibility alone has disrupted plans by taking away the element of surprise. The language sounds intense, but the process behind it is deliberate and controlled. There's another side to this story that may matter even more in daily life, and it doesn't involve patrol cars at all. It involves digital infrastructure, the networks and systems you rely on every day without thinking about them. Cybersecurity experts have quietly pointed out that if retaliation happens, cyberspace could be a primary arena. That's not guesswork. We've seen how even temporary tech outages, cloud services going down, stock trading systems freezing, email platforms failing, airline software glitches can affect millions of people in minutes. Daily life runs on interconnected systems. Banks need networks. Airlines use digital scheduling and routing. Hospitals depend on electronic records. Schools use online learning and communication tools. When those systems hiccup, the ripple effects spread quickly. That's what makes cyber operations attractive in asymmetric conflicts. They can cause confusion and economic disruption without a single shot being fired. They can create frustration, slow things down, and undermine confidence without crossing the line into open war. Right now, there is no confirmed cyber attack currently crippling U.S. infrastructure tied to this situation. But cybersecurity analysts consistently warn that the digital domain remains a realistic pressure point during moments of international tension. Timing would matter there too. If someone wanted maximum impact, they would aim for moments of peak dependency. The middle of the work week when markets are open, schools are in full swing, corporate networks are busiest, and travel is dense. That's when even a short outage can cascade across different sectors, delaying flights, pausing financial transactions, freezing communication tools. None of that automatically leads to physical harm, but it can generate confusion quickly. And confusion, in a tense geopolitical moment, can spread anxiety faster than verified facts. We've already seen how non-hostile tech failures, cloud outages, software bugs, failed updates can slow airports, block email access, or affect trading platforms. Those weren't acts of war, but they showed how deeply integrated and fragile our digital systems can be. That interconnectedness is both strength and vulnerability. When cybersecurity officials talk about being prepared, they're not forecasting disaster. They're recognizing that a digital shockwave can travel across the country in seconds. The good news is that both government and private infrastructure providers are aware of that risk, and cyber defense has become one of the most heavily funded areas of national security over the last decade. There are backups, redundancies, and rapid response protocols. But no system is perfect, which is why informed awareness, not fear, is important. At the same time, events in other parts of the world add emotional pressure. In parts of the Middle East, protests have broken out near U.S. embassies. Demonstrators upset by recent strikes have gathered, and in some cases, attempted to damage property. The images, crowds shouting, objects thrown, barriers reinforced, are dramatic. But we need to separate symbolic unrest abroad from imminent danger at home. Protests outside embassies, while serious, are not the same thing as organized domestic operations. They show anger and tension in international relationships. They do not automatically signal a coordinated attack inside the United States. From an intelligence perspective, moments like this are when agencies widen their focus. They monitor communications more closely, study online chatter, and look for patterns that might indicate inspiration, coordination, or planning. Asymmetric threats don't move in straight lines. They can be stirred by events overseas, intensified by charged rhetoric, or accelerated by misinformation. And in today's digital environment, misinformation can act like its own kind of weapon. spreading fear, twisting facts, and convincing people that catastrophe is unfolding where none exists. That's why careful, fact-based analysis matters so much right now. The gap between what's possible and what's probable is where most public anxiety lives. Understanding that gap is what lets you stay informed without being consumed. This moment is made even more serious by confirmed reports that 3 U.S. service members have been killed in connection with the escalating conflict. Whenever American personnel are lost, strategic calculations change. The discussion shifts from warnings and statements to response, deterrence, and showing resolve. Historically, when U.S. forces suffer casualties linked to adversaries, some form of counteraction follows. It doesn't always mean major escalation, but it does raise the pressure to act. And in periods of high tension, that back and forth can create a cycle: action, response, counter-response, each side trying to project strength and avoid appearing weak. That cycle is fragile, and misjudgments become a serious risk. This is where deterrence theory comes in, the idea that by clearly demonstrating overwhelming capability and a willingness to use it, you discourage further aggression. President Trump has issued strong public warnings that additional threats against the United States will not be tolerated, and that any further aggression will be met decisively. Strategically, that kind of language is intended to prevent escalation, not invite it. The goal is to draw a line so clear that the other side hesitates to cross it. But deterrence only works if both sides believe that crossing the line would carry unacceptable costs. And belief in geopolitics is shaped as much by emotion, domestic politics, and pride as by cold logic. Iran's leadership, facing internal unrest and global scrutiny after the loss of a long-standing supreme leader, also has incentives to project strength. Governments in that position often feel compelled to respond in some visible form to maintain their legitimacy at home. That response might be symbolic, digital, rhetorical, limited, or unexpectedly restrained, depending on internal calculations the outside world never fully sees. That uncertainty, the decisions made behind closed doors, is the variable no intelligence agency can model perfectly. Which is why analysts focus on likelihoods, not fantasies. Which actions could send a signal without triggering overwhelming retaliation? What responses might show resolve without tipping into full-scale war? Those are the questions being weighed right now. While those calculations continue at the federal level, local law enforcement is dealing with a different, very practical problem. Big city police departments can add patrols, deepen cooperation with federal task forces, and keep a closer watch on public spaces. But stopping every conceivable lone actor scenario is incredibly difficult. By design, lone wolf attacks typically involve minimal communication in advance. There may be no network to infiltrate, no obvious money trail, no clear orders to intercept. That's why campaigns like "If you see something, say something" exist. They're not about encouraging paranoia, they're about leveraging the eyes and instincts of ordinary people to notice things algorithms might miss. At the same time, police and security agencies have to balance vigilance with civil liberties. Acting on vague suspicion without cause carries its own dangers in a constitutional democracy. Overreacting can damage public trust and target innocent people. Underreacting can miss real warning signs. Finding that line is one of the hardest parts of domestic security work. Much of it happens quietly: information sharing, background checks, pattern analysis, and interagency coordination that never makes the news. Even during high alert periods, most days pass without incident. Preparedness is about shrinking windows of opportunity, not predicting the exact future. Understanding both the strengths and the limits of law enforcement helps keep expectations grounded in reality instead of extremes. So, what should Americans actually do in a moment like this? Strip away the geopolitics, headlines, and online noise, and that's the core question. What does this mean for you and your family? The most honest answer is, aim for awareness, not anxiety. An elevated alert level does not mean immediate danger. It means agencies are watching more closely and taking prevention seriously. You can't control global tensions, but you can control how you let them shape your day-to-day life. Stay connected to credible sources. Be careful about sharing unverified rumors, especially ones that spread faster than corrections. If you live in or near a major city, practice the same situational awareness you would at any large event, simply being present and observant in your surroundings. That isn't living in fear, it's basic common sense. On the cyber side, basic digital hygiene matters. Keep your devices updated, use strong passwords and two-factor authentication, and be extra cautious about strange links or messages, especially during high-profile international crises when phishing attempts spike. Most cyber disruptions, if they happen, will likely be temporary and frustrating rather than catastrophic. Preparing for that looks like having backup ways to communicate and a bit of patience, not stockpiling supplies for the end of the world. Proportional response is the key. Calm, measured preparation beats reactive panic every time. When we zoom back out to the bigger strategic picture, public messaging from leaders is a major factor. President Trump's stance has been direct. Any further threats will be met decisively, and long-running tensions with Iran will not be allowed to escalate unchecked. That message has a dual purpose. At home, it's meant to reassure Americans that the government intends to protect national interests and project strength. Internationally, it's intended as a warning to deter further retaliation. The complication is that strong rhetoric can either help stabilize a situation by making boundaries clear, or make it more volatile if the other side reads it as provocation. Iran's leadership, facing domestic pressure and international criticism, also has strong reasons to signal resilience. When a long-standing supreme leader is killed, the pressure to respond in some visible way grows quickly. That response may not look like what people expect from the outside. It could be symbolic, cyber, diplomatic, or limited. Much of that decision-making is hidden from public view, and that invisible human factor is the one no analyst can perfectly predict. Layered on top of all that is a variable that's always present in these moments: independent actors. Individuals who are not formally directed by any state, but feel emotionally or ideologically driven to act. History shows that geopolitical flashpoints can inspire people far from the conflict zone. Sometimes they exaggerate their own importance. Sometimes they act recklessly. Sometimes they are identified and stopped before anyone hears about them. But human unpredictability is something no system can fully erase. That's why federal agencies widen monitoring both internationally and domestically during high-tension periods. They watch for changes in online rhetoric, sudden spikes in communication, and ways in which global events are being reframed into personal calls to action. In today's digital environment, that process happens incredibly fast. A rumor can sweep the country in minutes. A misleading headline can cause panic long before it's corrected, if it ever is. Social media can distort scale, making isolated incidents look widespread, or turning routine security measures into proof of imminent disaster. Separating signal from noise becomes essential. Elevated alert levels are not unusual during major geopolitical shifts. In fact, many such periods end without a single incident on U.S. soil. That doesn't mean the precautions were unnecessary. It often means they worked. Extra patrols discouraged attempts, better intelligence disrupted planning, cyber teams closed vulnerabilities before anyone could exploit them. The nothing happened outcome is often the product of extensive invisible effort. Fear tends to think in absolutes. Either everything is safe or disaster is inevitable. National security doesn't work like that. It operates in probabilities, risk management, and mitigation. Right now, risk assessments have shifted enough to justify more vigilance, especially in big cities and key digital sectors. But that is very different from saying an attack is bound to happen. If you look back at previous tense periods with Iran, North Korea, Russia, or others, you see a recurring pattern: sharp rhetoric, tighter alerts, strategic repositioning, and then, often, a gradual easing as deterrence messages land and red lines are understood. That pattern doesn't guarantee calm, but it's a reminder that escalation is not automatic. There are exit ramps in international conflicts. There are back-channel talks the public never hears about. There are strong incentives on all sides to avoid truly uncontrollable outcomes. Recognizing that helps shrink fear back down to its proper size. Risks exist, but so do safeguards. Tensions are real, but so are layers of defense. Headlines amplify urgency, but probabilities still matter. So where does that leave us? It leaves us in a period of heightened vigilance rather than hysteria. Officials are watching closely. Major cities have boosted patrol visibility. Cybersecurity teams are reinforcing digital defenses. Intelligence agencies are scanning for asymmetric, small-scale threats rather than conventional warfare. And experts remain united on one central point. A direct missile strike from Iran on the U.S. mainland is not the realistic concern. The focus is on smaller-scale, harder-to-predict possibilities. Lone individuals, isolated incidents, or temporary cyber disruptions meant to cause confusion more than mass destruction. It's also important to remember that the U.S. has moved through tense, elevated threat environments before. After big geopolitical shocks, security postures tighten, systems are tested, agencies coordinate more closely, and in most cases, life goes on without major disruption, precisely because those precautions are in place. Seeing more police in New York or Los Angeles doesn't mean something is scheduled to happen there. It means those cities are high-value hubs, and precaution follows value. That's strategy, not panic. Confirmed U.S. casualties ensure that this moment is being taken seriously at the highest levels, and strategic messaging is aimed at preventing further escalation. Whether it calms the situation or sharpens it will depend on choices being made far from public view. That human element in international power struggles will always be the piece no one can perfectly forecast. For everyday Americans, the takeaway is steady, grounded awareness. Stay informed through reliable updates. Use basic digital caution. Pay attention to your surroundings. If you see something genuinely concerning, report it through official channels. But don't let hypothetical worst-case scenarios drown out probability and perspective. A heightened alert level is a protective posture, not a countdown timer. As of now, cities are functioning, infrastructure is intact, and there has been no confirmed domestic attack linked to this escalation. Agencies are in prevention mode, and while tensions are real, so are the safeguards built over decades to handle exactly this kind of moment. I'll keep watching developments and breaking them down clearly as new information emerges. In times like this, clarity matters more than volume. Stay safe, stay aware, and we'll face whatever comes next with facts, not fear.